Welcome to the Lawless Astrology channel. I'm Dabney Lawless. I am an evolutionary astrologer that is trained with the renowned Stephen Forrest. And what we do on this channel is I speak to a lot of amazing astrologers, and they help us bring the energy of the cosmos and the sky down here on planet Earth so we can become centered and conscious and live our best lives. So today, I'm very privileged to be speaking with Christina Caudill, who is with Radiant Astrology. She is a brilliant evolutionary astrologer, and she has the Radiant Astrology Podcast and her own YouTube channel, which I'm going to put all the information below. And you can go to, I'll have her website, and you can get a reading with her because she has some really profoundly deep insights. So she's fantastic. So anyway, today we're going to be talking about Kamala Harris, and we're going to be talking about her chart and the upcoming election and even inauguration day from an evolutionary standpoint. So a little less from the kind of hardcore predictive, but much more looking at the symbols and what this means for our country and what it means for maybe Kamala. So welcome, Christina.
Great. Thank you, Dabney. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for that very beautiful and generous introduction. I so appreciate it.
I mean every word of it. That is for sure. I mean every word of it. So we were kind of riffing on Instagram together about how the momentum and the excitement in the air about Kamala's chart and just Kamala in general, just so much momentum out the gate. So we were sort of thinking that we do a different kind of astrology, that it might be really interesting for people just to get to know the candidate from a different point of view. So should I just pull up our chart, or do you have anything you want to say to kind of set the stage?
Well, yeah, to set the stage, what's so interesting is, the landscape of consciousness, and society is really being changed a lot right now, transformed with Pluto going from Capricorn to Aquarius. And this fall in 2024, we'll have the final sort of backup of Pluto, like in the very end of Capricorn, sort of wrapping up that whole story from 2008, which I've seen generally about a story of like the patriarchy, about the Pluto, what do we call it when we look at people who've got a lot of money? Plutocracies. I think that's what they call it,
Yeah.
actually.
And
And
oligarchy as well. But I agree with you, plutocracy, yeah.
all that stuff. Where because Pluto is power, and it's the ways that we give our power away. And some of those big ones have to do with money, have to do with, people we perceive have perceived power. And then there is real power. There's the political power, where there's people that actually have the power to be able to change the course of, the lives of many people. And then shifting that into which is a very different energy. We're going from an earth sign to an air sign. Aquarius is more about the collective. And, we like to think of it as like power to the people, and there's that element. But with Pluto being that sort of power struggle, we've seen a lot of, needing to find a way to assert our power collectively. And that being a lot bigger part of the story. It's not like one is better than the other or one is darker than the other, because Pluto does bring up, a lot of the darkness that we haven't been dealing with, that suddenly is really in our face, and we can no longer ignore it. But on a higher level, it can be that sense of when we can regenerate the phoenix rising from the ashes, when we have faced, what's in decay, what's toxic, what needs to be eliminated so that we can start fresh. And that is, one of the promises of Pluto moving into a new sign, a new element. And then we have other outer planets, especially when we talk about power, political power, the power of, those in control versus the power of the people, and what the zeitgeist is calling for. That the fact that that's all happening now during this massive election, it's no coincidence, because these planets sort of correlate, to our experience of life on Earth. So that's definitely a big part of the background.
I completely agree. So, as evolutionary astrologers, we focus a lot on Pluto and we focus a lot on the nodes. And so, when I've been looking at this, Pluto's kind of the most important thing to me because I love mundane astrology. I love the astrology of kind of the collective. And so, when I'm doing a reading with someone, I'm looking at what's happening in their personal chart and how the planets are interacting with them personally. But we can gain and glean a lot from how the planets are interacting with one another. And a lot of times when we do these forecasts, it's really kind of more collective energy. And Pluto is, especially for evolutionary astrologers, I mean, that's the big daddy. Like that's the one that we care the most about. And this transition from Capricorn, which is, a cardinal sign, it has been a roller coaster going into now Aquarius, which is going to be just a completely different set of issues. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of the dark side of technology, and we're going to have a whole other set of issues. And I think that we're going to be seeing some resolution here in the next few months. And so this is kind of like the real, kind of the final battle for, this Pluto and Capricorn energy. So let's pull up Kamala's chart. I did have one other quick thing I wanted to say, which was I've noticed a lot of her campaign materials have power to the people.
Oh, that's right. I saw that during a rally and I was like, that definitely sounds very Aquarian.
I know. I was like, does she have an astrologer on on staff? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can actually look at Kamala's chart. So do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So why don't we kind of jump in here for those who are not as versed in astrology. I'm going to, sort of drive around with my little cursor, and Christina and I are going to really just sort of dig in and kind of give you some language about what we see here when we look at Kamala's chart. So do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Well, just, from a very basic standpoint, the big three that are like the first thing that we tend to see in a chart that shows more about the person's, their kind of personality, their overall like major archetypes is sun, moon, and rising. And she's a Libra sun, opposite moon in Aries. That means she was born on a full moon. And oftentimes, people born on a full moon, that's where the emotional life, which is your emotional needs, and usually your internal, emotional needs of nourishment and, the attachments you form with people. And it's more of the private self. And the sun is often considered, our public self, the role that we play in this lifetime. It's more of the conscious identity. The fact that she's born on a full moon, they can sometimes be in conflict. Or phase has a lot to do with kind of the energy of sort of that overall life destiny. And a full moon, that is like, big, right? That's a big energy. The moon is reflecting the light of the sun. And so that's making a big impact, especially on the outer world, the world of society, which is very much the 11th house. And then the rising sign is like the horizon of your life. It was what was rising at the moment of birth. Gemini, oftentimes Gemini rising, they can feel like they have a lot of different sides to their personality. They can put on a lot of different hats. They can be a lot more, fluid in how they present themselves and things like that. But as evolutionary astrologers, I think the first thing we probably like pings our eye is that the North Node is on the ascendant. And so that is another indication of, this person has a lot of energy and potentially, a lot of karma they're working through in this lifetime that has to do with their personal identity. Again, the ascendant is like, there's this phrase, the mask we wear to the world. But it's really about the self, the name badge, the how we present ourselves to people. Um, Now, Jeffrey Wolf Green, he has kind of like a little different take on it. It's not like completely like he doesn't agree with the, general take, but he's said that the ascendant is our raw instinctual self. It's like who we really are, but that the descendant, the opposite. So for her, it's Sagittarius, is um our conditioned self, like what we think people expect from us. And he sees that more as sort of the mask, and that a lot of times we see people on their descendant sign, that's kind of tends to be how they show up, because they feel like, okay, I have to adjust to what people's expectations of me are. But essentially, the seventh house, the opposite sign of the self, that's others, and the energy that others sort of bring into our lives. So having the south node right on the descendant typically is, early in lifetime. It's a sense of codependency with others, a sense of maybe other people, depending on other people to help you to form your own identity. And the growth of the North Node on the ascendant is growing into your own sense of individuality, your own sense of your own personal identity, what you're here to bring to the world. Um, and then when it comes to things like marriage and partnerships, that there is, a tendency toward, maybe even uh taking on someone else's, a partner's identity, whereas the growth is to come into your own. So interestingly, as a vice president, you're kind of in the shadow of the president, and not a lot is generally expected of a vice president, right? Like, they're kind of just there as like the spare or whatever. And but to me, this says, her coming into her own, her coming out of the shadow of, a big, personality, or a big, powerful person. That to me speaks a lot to this evolutionary intention that she was born with.
I
What do
love
you think,
that.
Dabney?
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, sticking with the nodes, one of the things that struck me is she's born of an Indian mother and a Jamaican father. So she has a biracial identity. And that's really come into play already in this campaign.
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
say no more, but just ridiculousness. But anyway, so when I see the Sagittarius South Node, I see that kind of what you say, like when the seventh house is about, living for other people and your identity wrapped up in other people. And Sagittarius has a lot to do with different cultures, and the combining of different cultures, and learning from them, and something much more foreign or international. And so here we have this kind of something that potentially has been a struggle for her whole life, is like finding her own identity, knowing that she's caught between two worlds, or even three worlds, because then you sort of put in this sort of biracial in America. And so the ruler of her south node is Jupiter up at here in this 12th house, and things in the 12th house are often hidden and are harder to access. And so it's almost like she's had to work very hard, and we'll get to this Saturn on the midheaven, but she's had to kind of work very hard to establish her own identity. And I imagine there's been a lot of projection onto her, because that that luck, that Taurus, that more grounded internal spiritual self is behind closed doors, like the who's the real Kamala Harris kind of thing. And now we're starting to see that as she steps into her north node, which I'm sure she has been all along. The north node and the south node is a journey, but we have to stretch ourselves to get to that north node. So for her, Gemini rising to me is someone who's incredibly charismatic, somebody who can get along with multiple people, someone who just has this sort of it factor. and really likes a lot of different information and data and knowledge. And so here with the North Node angularly in the first house, exactly what you said, I agree. Stepping into your own, coming out into the world, declaring that you're here to work with other people, but this is ultimately about her coming into her own voice and finding her own voice. And that's something that I don't, it's really interesting to look at like how different the campaigns were run in such a, like, it was almost like a switch got flipped. Like all of a sudden we have this much more aggressive campaign, much more like, I didn't see any sort of power to the people before I got, a lot of like, a more somber campaign, to be honest with you, about like, we have to fight for democracy. And that was kind of the message that we got over and over again, versus like something a little bit more joyous and a little bit more Pluto in Aquarius versus Pluto in Capricorn. And so
Yeah, we have to do the right thing, Pluto Capricorn, versus the power to the people, like you were saying.
right. So I just think that her message is resonating more because it was the right time. And Gemini also represents youth. So here we also have, and also communication. So here we have a campaign that's just on steroids with the youth and with social media.
Social media, yeah.
And so all of this is much more air forward thinking. Like it's just a much better campaign for the current times. And I also think about all these Zoom calls, which is also very Gemini, right? Like everybody getting on a call together and talking about how we're going to make this happen. It's just electrified energy. So,
and also her moon in the 11th too. I think she is tuned in to, sort of the group dynamic, the collective, and things like that. And then Mercury, rules Gemini, so that rules her North Node and her ascendant, and it's essentially conjunct her sun, even though it's out of sign. But that really, the sun conjunct Mercury. Now, Mercury and the sun and Venus rarely are, very apart. They're these personal planets. They travel very closely to the sun anyway. But to have it that close to the sun, to me, it almost acts like a secondary ruler. And then, Venus that rules her sun is in Mercury sign. So when you have that sort of, connection where they're in, they're connected that way, or Venus is answering to Mercury, and Mercury is so closely conjunct to the sun. There is this sort of blend of that Mercurial and Venusian energy, at least the planets ruling them, are supporting each other. And so what I like about that, though, is the sun in Libra. Oftentimes they say Libra, just wants everyone to get along, is the ultimate diplomat, but sometimes will gloss over things just for the sake of peace, but not when your Mercury is in Scorpio. Mercury in Scorpio, she might sometimes think, okay, maybe I better zip it because otherwise it's going to upset everybody. But generally, Mercury in Scorpio, Scorpio wants what's raw and what's truthful and what's real. And we've seen, she made her mark when she had some very sharp, very, direct and intense, questioning like people for the Supreme Court and things like that. She was not scared to go toe to toe with, some very intimidating characters, very powerful people. But then she does also have that ability to also kind of be like, like you said, like very pleasant to people, to be like, someone you might know, she can kind of bring herself down to earth and have that sort of attractiveness that we know of Libra.
Yeah. So what stands out to me too is, she's a warrior at heart, right? So the 11th house, when you have a moon in Aries, the high side of the moon in Aries is someone who's incredibly loyal, fierce, like they're not even if they're afraid of something, they're going to take on the challenge, right? So that's like, she has to come up against challenges. But the combination of the moon in Aries with Mercury and Scorpio, there's been rumors that she can be difficult to work for. And so my imagination is that, she probably sometimes has a bit of a temper, or she has like a sharp tongue. And that to some degree that might be what we need right now. That was really on display when she was in Atlanta and she said, "Say it to my face." There's kind of this like, no, I'm not going to let you just get away with bullying me behind the scenes. If you really have something to say it to my face. And I loved that, because that to me was very like, it was creative, it was electrifying, it was fun, and that's very kind of like bold and in your face and sharp tongued. So I think
Mm-hmm.
we're going to see more of that from the campaign, where it's like she's not going to dance around things the way that maybe we, as progressive Democrat, that campaign that we were running was much more like the high road, and for a while we've been doing the like, when they go low, we go
Oh, go
high.
ahead.
And unfortunately, that wasn't working. I think I would dare say that
We,
didn't work.
because the lows kept getting lower.
Right. And sometimes you just got to smack a bully in the nose and they go running away. And so that's where I think like she's got some incredible juice there. So that also,
Well,
that's,
also, can I say something on that
yeah,
point?
go for it.
Is her Mars opposite Saturn. I mean, when she said the thing about, I know Trump's type because I have seen, she's been on the side of the law, right? So it's the prosecutor versus the criminal thing. To me, I see that very much in that Mars and Leo, opposite Saturn. And even in, so I would guess in her own life, there were times when she felt that external force of Saturn, that authority figure, over her own Mars. We all have experienced, our own Mars being sort of arrested by Saturn or being suppressed by Saturn. But when you can internalize it, and when she then becomes that Saturnian authority figure, on the side of like, trapping or catching the bad guys or what have you. I feel like that's sort of been internalized for her, and that she can actually really become that Saturn figure, because Saturn, she also has Saturn retrograde. And a lot of those people with Saturn retrograde, whether it's the father wasn't always really there or present or something like that, it generally suggests that, because I have Saturn retrograde also. And I mean, my father was always there, but like he worked at night. I also have the sun in the 12th house, which I think is a representative of that too. So I hardly ever saw him, but I needed to develop my own internal authority figure, what that feels like and looks like for me when I didn't have it there, like on a day-to-day basis. And on some level, a lot of times Saturn retrograde, we can see that where there may be a time where we're learning our own wing, we're growing our own wings, we're growing our own sense of, what that Saturn, that internal father figure looks like for us to be able to live into.
I love that. And I think what's also very interesting to me, Saturn on the midheaven indicates tremendous amount of strength, authority, somebody. And I love that it's in Aquarius for her right now in this moment where Pluto's going into Aquarius. The Queen Elizabeth during World War II, she has Saturn on the midheaven. And so there's this like, kind of like the responsibility, I'm not saying that, like, let's say she wins, that doesn't necessarily mean all of our problems go away. There's a lot of things on fire in the world right now. And I think what's also interesting to me, that despite Saturn being right on her midheaven, the actual sign on the midheaven is Pisces. And so that's kind of, when you look at the midheaven, it's for what people see from far away. And so what they see from far away is a water sign. And so I imagine there's kind of this sense of her being underestimated and, kind of like, oh, she's a woman. Oh, she's, can't be relied upon. The downside of Pisces can be flaky and, kind of go with the flow. And so there's sort of this like underestimating, stealthy Saturn here that says that's not the full picture. I mean, the high side of Pisces is also incredibly compassionate and dreamy and artistic. And so there's a lot of beauty to having the Pisces right on the midheaven. Imagine that's why, like, all these videos of her dancing and things like that, because there's kind of that creative dance dancing, and she's got really good music and stuff like that. But it's sort of like there's something underneath that there that's like hard as nails.
Hmm. And like the midheaven, a lot of times they'll say it's also your reputation. And what's so interesting about it is her, having Saturn's so close to the midheaven, any planet that is like a conjunct an angle, a lot of times we consider that like a secondary ruler, right? So it's like Saturn is big up there on the midheaven, and so that is someone who has had a long-term career. They've even said that she has more experience in politics than any other president that came before her because she's been in politics. I mean, she's run for office, she's been a senator, she's all this stuff. She's had years of experience, and so that is coalescing right now. But you're right, it is in the sign of Pisces, which is a little unclear. Maybe people don't quite know what to make of her. It's interesting because, of course, as soon as you become, in this heightened position, people want to drag up things from the past and throw things at them, like all these, they'll find anything that could be at all, not squeaky clean. But it seems like with the Neptune, I mean, with a Pisces there, it might not all, all of it just seems like it almost even evaporates because it's not anything really worthy of really sticking. Um,
But there's a lot
and
of projection I see. So this
yes,
Chiron here is where it is a wound for her, being projected upon people kind of making sexist, misogynistic, or racist remarks. So, we have to look at the chart in its entirety, but I do see that being kind of an Achilles heel for her, is that people are kind of unclear about who she is. They're going to project onto her. So in some ways that may work in her advantage, and then some ways that may harm her, right?
well, I would think that, and we'll look at the transits too, because I have a lot to say about it. Um, Chiron is also, there's two sides to Chiron, really. It's the wound that will never heal. But as we attempt to heal it, that's, we can find other avenues of healing ourselves. The other thing is it's the maverick also. It is, and especially in the 10th house, it's usually someone who comes from almost from nowhere with maybe completely different qualifications than what is expected in the career. And they find a way to sort of succeed or to make it work, because that Chiron is blazing one's own trail in a new way. When you don't have the support that most people of the 10th house would have in that area, and again, being a Black woman, being the first one to be anywhere close to the presidency, that's that dual side of Chiron. That's like that maverick, but then it's like, who am I to be here? Because there hasn't been any real role models for this particular role.
I love that. And I also, I just like, I want to riff on it because I've been really into Chiron lately. So I think that that is spot on. And Chiron is such a personal planet. It has so much to do with who you are as a person in your own pain and your own wounding. And yet it does have a gift for the rest of the world. And so being in the 10th house in Pisces, the gift really, if we're focusing on that, is that she's going to bring compassion. She's going to bring healing back to our country. I think that's the thing that I see with this, is that there's the potential for tremendous bringing people together, and Pisces is a healer sign. And so, I think we're in need of desperate healing. And so here she is, like someone who can heal us finally.
I think also, and then, you look at that, it's heavily aspected. It's opposed by Uranus, Pluto, and Venus. And what that says to me, because that Pluto Uranus generation in the 60s in Virgo, they were born during the women's liberation movement. And they are just really now coming into their own as healers and as women in potentially positions of power. To me, what that really indicates is she was the first one. Like once she was, declared herself, she's, running for president, really talking directly about abortion and women's right to abortion. And they said that Joe Biden always kind of danced around it because, he's Catholic and he comes from a different generation. And he would say things like women's right to choose and, like just dance around, never the A word. But she has come right out and said, we want to protect women's right for abortion, women's right to choose what to do with their bodies because we know what's best for us. And speaking directly to that wound, that sort of configuration there in a very public way, as you said, it being in the 10th house.
So that brings us to this powerhouse conjunction down in her fourth house, which is Uranus, Pluto, and Venus all in Virgo. And I really think that this, you can't ignore this triple conjunction. And in some ways it's got a little bit of a different energy than the rest of the chart, right? Because Uranus is the sign of revolution and genius, and everyone has it in their chart, so I'm not calling her out specifically for that, but it's right next to Pluto. And Pluto can be a wound, but it's also where we hold tremendous strength and authority and power. And it's next to Venus, which is how we communicate. So here we have change, power, and authority and relationships all dancing together very closely in the sign of Virgo, which likes to get things done. Virgo rolls up their sleeves and says, all right, how are we going to tackle this problem? And so I would love to hear your take on this powerhouse conjunction.
Wow. Well, I love Venus in Virgo because to me, I often see it as, especially say people who are public figures or famous, like that it seems like they're great at preparation. It's all like you said, they want to get things done, but they also really want, and it could go both ways. It could be a hindrance too, the perfectionism. But to me, I feel like that that speaks a lot to her background in I believe she was an attorney or she was in law. So there has to be something with getting those words right, because it's in Mercury's sign, and being like really well prepared, really sharp, and having that sort of rebellious energy, which through the Uranus, and that power, as you said, through Pluto. Um, and so I think when she is directing this toward, again, as we said, a Chiron 10th house public wound, whatever that wound is, and it can take many forms, it can be, the oppression of Black people, of immigrants, or wherever that's directed to, then it can also draw with Venus. Venus likes to attract, so it's attracting other people to the cause, to a cause of something that needs to be renovated or completely, transformed in the collective. And also that needs that sort of rebellious, risk taking, we're going to change things once and for all kind of energy. To me, I feel like it can come. I mean, it can also, well, it can be kind of disturbing it too, because there's such big energy with these outer planets. But when I see it directed to a collective purpose, and that likely is something that's always just waiting to be activated within her. And who knows how it comes out in her, personal relationships or her personal life. But when it comes to activating these on a collective, then it can be very powerful about getting everyone else on board too. We're going to all change this. We have to be together with this. There's a wound that needs to be healed, and it takes all of us collectively to have the power to make a difference.
So anything else that you would want to say about that triple conjunction?
Just that, Venus being the ruler of her sun. And again, the sun is, our conscious identity, the central focus of our chart, what we intend consciously. It's a very important triple conjunction because, Venus is in that mix. So as much as Venus in Libra we tend to see it as wanting, again, balance, wanting to make life nice for everybody else and things like that, which I'm sure she has a certain element of that too. It's wrapped up in this real desire to make change, to change things that, with Uranus, it means like sort of flipping the script on, what we know to be true. And also, I often see that as that signature of, with Virgo being like the maiden, right? It's like, this ideal of what women should be, like nice and pure and youthful. That generation had kind of is really ready to completely smash that whole patriarchal ideal. And so she's right in the mix with that. So having a personal planet like Venus in there, to me, I feel like and I don't know how, I mean, I haven't been following her very closely for a long time. I don't know how forward she is when it comes to, say, women's issues in general, but to me, that's the signifier of someone who has like this real intense desire to change the world, especially for women, and get us up to speed with, where we are right now and what women need.
Yep. Yep. I think the last thing I would want to close with, and you touched on the Mars opposite Saturn, but having Mars in Leo is really courage. And it's in the third house about communication. And Leo has a little bit of a creative spark. So I have Mars in Leo. So this one's close to my heart. And I love my Mars in Leo because unfortunately it can be a little dramatic sometimes. But I think especially when you are, presenting on a world stage, having a little bit of a dramatic flair, having a way to communicate with people with courage and just really, like you said, not dancing around the issues. I've been watching her ads during the Olympics, and I can tell she's, her campaign picked very positive ads during the Olympics. Like she's not attacking anyone, which I think is smart, but she is coming head on and talking about that women should be able to, have the right to choose in every state, not, kind of saying like, we're not going to go back. We're not going to like go backwards. We're going to actually take this on head on. So, so unless there's anything else on the chart here, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Are you good, Christina?
Yeah. And she's a fighter with that, essentially Mars trying the moon, both in fire signs. So I believe her when she says she's ready for a fight.
I believe her as well. Okay, yeah, lots of grand trines and all sorts of juicy stuff. We could talk for hours about this. So this has been so fascinating that I think that maybe we're going to break it up into multiple videos. We're going to have 2 different videos. So this one is really going to be focused on the chart, the evolutionary astrology chart for Kamala Harris. And I'm going to have Christina back on to talk about the transits of election day and inauguration day in a separate video. So I'll put them out potentially even at the same time, but I want people to have the ability to actually kind of really sit with this information because especially if you're a burgeoning astrologer and trying to learn how to piece together things in a chart, I think it's a great example, and it'll be fun to watch in real time how she expresses her chart out on the world stage. So any other closing thoughts for this particular video before I jump in and see you again in a few minutes?
No, thank you, Dabney. I mean, I hope people have been able to see like how fascinating it is to look at a natal chart. And even and I'm sure you probably agree, Dabney, that I mean, as many decades as I've been looking at my chart, still once in a while, something will just come out and like just click, or you'll see something in a new way. So before even going through, so I'm glad that we really sat really deeply with Kamala's natal chart before going into all the transits, because we want to know, really get some clarity on what we're working with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much, Christina. So this is Christina from Radiant Astrology. I'm going to put all of her information below, and I do believe she's still doing readings. So yeah, so get
Thank
a
you for
reading.
reading.
Get a reading. She has reports. She does courses. So really, really class act. So as always, there is a reason and a season for it all, and the universe is conspiring to help us. And yes, You can tell that I'm slightly biased. I have always been very open about where I stand here. So if you would like to say that I'm biased in the comments, feel free to. But if you're nasty, I will delete your comment. So you can say I'm biased. That's okay. That does not mean the astrology is not accurate and quality and good. So anyway, the universe conspiring, all that good stuff. Until next time.